At 2100 hours on December 7, 1942, HMS Tuna surfaced in the Bay of Biscay, 9 miles off the French coast. Sea state, rough. Wave height, 5 meters. Wind, 20 knots from northwest. Temperature, 3 degrees Celsius. In the submarine's forward torpedo room, 10 Royal Marines prepared to launch 6 kayaks into darkness. Major Herbert George Hassler checked his watch. The tide race at the mouth of the Gironde estuary would peak at 2200 hours. They had 1 hour to launch, form up, and reach the estuary before the tidal flow became impassable. After that, the window closed. The mission would abort. 6 months of training. Approval from Admiral Mountbatten. Authorization from Prime Minister Churchill. All of it depended on getting 6 canvas kayaks off a submarine deck in 5-meter swells within 60 minutes. Hassler gave the order. Launch. Within 2 hours, 2 kayaks would be lost. 2 Marines would drown. By morning, another kayak would be captured. Within 5 days, only 2 kayaks would reach Bordeaux. Of 10 Marines who launched from Tuna, 8 would be dead within 3 months. But those 2 kayaks would plant 16 limpet mines on German blockade runners. Ships worth millions, cargo irreplaceable. The raid would demonstrate that no German port was safe. And it would prove that sometimes the most effective weapon is not firepower but audacity. This is the story of Operation Frankton, the kayak raid on Bordeaux, the mission that became known as the Cockleshell Heroes. 10 Marines, 6 kayaks, 70 miles of river, 5 nights of paddling, against tides, currents, patrols, and probability. A raid that should have been impossible. A raid that succeeded because men were willing to paddle canvas boats into the heart of occupied France knowing most would never return. The narrative begins not on the water, but at a desk. In May 1942, when Major Hassler submitted a proposal to Combined Operations Headquarters. Hassler was 30 years old, Royal Marines officer, passionate yachtsman. He had built his first canoe as a boy following instructions from Boy's own paper. He had sailed extensively around Portsmouth Harbor and the Isle of Wight. He understood small boats intimately, and he believed small boats could accomplish what heavy forces could not. The problem was Bordeaux. The port sat 70 miles up the Gironde estuary. German occupation had converted it into a critical supply hub. Ships departing Bordeaux carried raw materials to Germany: rubber, tin, tungsten, animal oils, vegetable oils. The cargo originated in the Far East, smuggled through the British blockade, and entered Europe through Bordeaux. Between June 1941 and June 1942, over 25,000 tons of crude rubber alone passed through the port. The material was essential to German war production. Bomber Command could not reach Bordeaux effectively. The port was at the limit of operational range. Bombing accuracy at such distances was poor. Anti-aircraft defenses were formidable. The few raids attempted caused minimal damage. The Royal Navy could not penetrate the estuary. German coastal batteries and mines made surface approaches suicidal. Conventional assault was impossible. Hassler proposed an unconventional solution: deliver Royal Marines by submarine to the mouth of the Gironde, launch them in collapsible kayaks, paddle 70 miles upriver at night, hide during daylight, reach Bordeaux, plant limpet mines on docked ships, escape overland to Spain. The proposal was audacious. Most staff officers considered it suicide. But Admiral Louis Mountbatten, Chief of Combined Operations, saw potential. Mountbatten had been appointed by Churchill to develop offensive capabilities, small-scale raids, Commandos, operations designed to harass Germany and boost British morale after years of defeats. Stealing a Würzburg radar at Bruneval had succeeded. Perhaps a raid on Bordeaux could succeed. On October 13, 1942, Mountbatten approved Operation Frankton, but he increased the force from 3 kayaks to 6. He also ruled that Hassler, as the only officer with expertise in small boats, must lead the raid personally. Hassler assembled his force from the Royal Marines Boom Patrol Detachment. The RMBPD had been formed in July 1942. 34 Marines, based at South Sea, Portsmouth. Their nominal mission was patrolling harbor booms. Their actual purpose was testing unconventional warfare techniques. Hassler selected his best men. Volunteers only. Men who could paddle, men who could navigate, men who understood that survival was unlikely. The kayak selected was the Cockle Mark II, designed by Fred Goatley of Saunders Row on the Isle of Wight. The Mark II was a semi-rigid 2-man craft. Length, 15 feet, 4.6 meters. Beam, 28 inches. Construction, plywood deck and bottom. Canvas sides. The frame could collapse to 6 inches depth for storage. When erected, the kayak could carry 2 men plus 480 pounds of equipment. Maximum load included 8 limpet mines, 3 paddles, compass, depth sounder, repair kit, camouflage net, rations for 6 days, water, hand grenades, Colt 1911 pistols, Fairbairn Sykes fighting knives, and tools to activate the mines. The limpet mine was critical. Each mine contained 8.8 pounds of plastic explosive. The mine attached to a ship's hull using magnets. A time delay fuse allowed the attackers to escape before detonation. Hassler planned to set all fuses for 9 hours. The kayaks would plant mines after midnight. The mines would detonate at approximately 0900 hours. The Marines would be miles away when the explosions occurred. Training began October 20th. Kayak handling in Portsmouth Harbor. Submarine rehearsals with HMS Tuna. Limpet mine arming and placement. Escape and evasion techniques. Navigation in darkness. The Marines practiced a simulated attack on Deptford. Paddling from Margate up the Swale. They learned to paddle silently. To navigate by compass and watch. To hide kayaks during daylight. To avoid detection by maintaining absolute silence. They trained for 8 weeks. By December 1st, Hassler judged them ready. The force numbered 13 men. Hassler selected 10 for the raid. 3 would remain as reserve. The kayaks received code names of sea creatures: catfish, crayfish, conger, cuttlefish, coalfish, cachalot. Catfish would be crewed by Hassler and Marine Bill Sparks. Crayfish by Corporal Albert Laver and Marine William Mills. Conger by Corporal George Sheard and Marine David Moffat. Cuttlefish by Sergeant Samuel Wallace and Marine Robert Ewart. Coalfish by Marine James Conway and Marine Eric Fisher, later substituted by Marines Norman Colley and William Ellery. Cachalot by Marine William Ellery and Marine Eric Fisher. The plan was straightforward. HMS Tuna would transport the force to the Gironde. The submarine would surface at the estuary mouth on the night of December 7th. The kayaks would launch. They would paddle into the estuary, navigating south toward Bordeaux. Each night, they would paddle with the incoming tide. Each day, they would hide in marshes or woods along the shore. After 5 nights, they would reach Bordeaux. They would attack on the night of December 11th. After planting mines, they would scuttle the kayaks and escape overland. French resistance would assist. The escape route led through occupied France to Spain, then to Gibraltar, then home. Every element of the plan was dangerous. The tidal race at the Gironde mouth was legendary. Local fishermen avoided it. The currents created standing waves exceeding 5 meters. Kayaks could capsize instantly. The river itself was patrolled. German guards watched the shores. Fishing boats operated during the day. Any sighting would trigger alerts. Bordeaux harbor was heavily defended. Sentries patrolled the docks. Ships maintained watches. Discovery meant immediate capture or death. And the escape was the most dangerous element. 100 miles on foot through occupied territory. No support, no extraction. The French resistance was active but unpredictable. Trusting strangers meant risking betrayal. The Gestapo was efficient. The SS was brutal. Captured commandos were rarely treated as prisoners of war. Hitler's Commando order, issued October 18, 1942, mandated execution of all captured commandos. The Marines knew this. They went anyway. On November 30, 1942, HMS Tuna departed Holyloch, Scotland. Commander Richard Rakes, commanding. The submarine carried 10 Marines and 6 kayaks. The kayaks were stored, collapsed in the forward torpedo room. For 7 days, Tuna traveled south through the Atlantic. The Marines lived in cramped spaces, breathing recycled air, waiting. On December 6th, Tuna reached the Gironde. Rakes studied the approaches. Tidal conditions were acceptable. Weather was marginal. Seas were rough but manageable. He decided to proceed. At 19:30 hours on December 7th, Tuna surfaced. Waves crashed over the conning tower. The deck crew immediately began bringing kayaks topside. The submarine's deck gun was used as a makeshift crane. One by one, the kayaks were lifted through the torpedo loading hatch and onto the deck. Marines scrambled topside to receive them. They worked in darkness with waves washing over them. Salt spray blinded them. The deck heaved. Several Marines were nearly swept overboard. Cachalot came through the hatch. Marine Ellery and Marine Fisher began erecting it. As they lifted the kayak, a wave struck. Cachalot slammed against the hatch coaming. An 18-inch tear opened in the canvas side. The kayak was unusable. Hassler ordered Ellery and Fisher to remain aboard Tuna with Marine Collie. The mission would proceed with 5 kayaks. 10 men. By 2100 hours, 5 kayaks were in the water alongside Tuna. The Marines boarded. Hassler and Catfish with Sparks. Laver and Crayfish with Mills. Sheard and Conger with Moffat. Wallace and Cuttlefish with Ewart. Conway and Coalfish with Fisher. The kayaks formed up. Hassler gave the signal. They paddled into darkness. Within 1 hour, they encountered the first tidal race. Hassler had briefed the Marines on what to expect. The race was a convergence of currents where the Atlantic tide met the estuary outflow. Standing waves, whirlpools, unpredictable surges. The kayaks paddled into it line astern. Catfish first, the others following. Catfish struck the race and was lifted violently. Hassler and Sparks paddled furiously to maintain control. The kayak crested one wave, plunged into a trough, was struck sideways by another wave. Water poured in. Sparks bailed while Hassler paddled. They fought through and waited on the far side. Crayfish emerged, then Cuttlefish, then Coalfish. They waited for Conger. Conger did not appear. Hassler and Sparks paddled back into the race. They searched. No sign of Conger. They returned to the others. They waited 30 minutes. Nothing. Hassler faced a decision: abort and search or continue the mission. He had lost 2 men and 1 kayak. He had 8 men and 4 kayaks remaining. The tide was turning. If they did not move immediately, they would miss the window. He gave the order. Continue. The 4 kayaks paddled south. Unknown to Hassler, Conger had capsized in the race. Sheard and Moffat clung to the overturned kayak. Waves battered them. The water temperature was 3 degrees. Hypothermia set in within minutes. Wallace and Ewart and Cuttlefish spotted them. They attempted to tow Conger closer to shore, but Conger was waterlogged and nearly impossible to move. Sheard and Moffat were losing consciousness. Wallace made the agonizing decision. He released the tow. Sheard and Moffat drifted away. They died of hypothermia within hours. Their bodies washed ashore days later. French civilians found them and buried them secretly. The 4 remaining kayaks paddled until 0200 hours. They had covered approximately 5 miles. They were exhausted. The incoming tide was weakening. Hassler ordered them ashore to hide for the day. They beached at Pointe aux Oiseaux, a marshy area with dense vegetation. They pulled the kayaks into reeds and covered them with camouflage nets. They ate cold rations and tried to sleep. Sentries watched in shifts. At 0600 hours, voices, German patrol. Hassler signaled absolute silence. The Marines froze. The patrol passed within 50 meters. The Germans did not search the marsh. The patrol continued. The Marines waited until the voices faded. They remained hidden until dusk. At 2100 hours, December 8th, the kayaks launched again. 4 kayaks, 8 men. They paddled south with the tide. Navigation was by compass. Hassler maintained a course paralleling the eastern shore at approximately 500 meters distance. The night was dark. No moon. Clouds obscured stars. They paddled by feel and compass bearing. After 6 hours, they had covered 22 miles. At 0300 hours, Hassler ordered them ashore. They hid on Ile de Cazaux, an island in the estuary. Again, they covered the kayaks and waited. During the day, German aircraft flew overhead. A patrol boat passed close enough that the Marines could hear conversation. They remained motionless. The patrol did not detect them. As dusk approached, Hassler briefed the night's route. They would paddle 15 miles. The estuary was narrowing. Shipping traffic would increase. Risk of detection was rising. At 2100 hours, December 9th, they launched, 4 kayaks in line astern. The night was clearer. Visibility improved. This increased risk. They paddled close to shore, using shadows for concealment. At 0030 hours, Coalfish separated from the formation. Conway and Fisher were missing. Hassler waited. They did not reappear. 3 kayaks remained. 6 men. Conway and Fisher had been separated by strong currents. They attempted to rejoin but lost sight of the formation. They continued toward Bordeaux independently. On December 10th, they hid near Saint-Gens-de-Blaye. French civilians spotted them. The civilians reported them to German authorities. Conway and Fisher were captured. They were interrogated. They revealed nothing of value. On December 11th, under Hitler's commando order. They were executed by firing squad. Conway was 31. Fisher was 21. 3 kayaks continued. Catfish, crayfish, cuttlefish. They paddled through the night of December 9th to 10th, 15 miles. The estuary had become a river. The shores were developed, buildings, docks, fishing boats. They paddled in shadows, hugging the eastern bank. At 0300 hours, Hassler ordered them ashore near Blaye. During the day of December 10th, disaster struck again. Wallace and Ewart and Cuttlefish chose a hiding spot in reeds near a small creek. At approximately 1000 hours, French fishermen spotted the kayak. They did not report it immediately, but later that day, a German patrol investigated. Wallace and Ewart were captured. They were interrogated. Under Hitler's commando order, they were executed on December 11th. Wallace was 36. Ewart was 22. 2 kayaks remained. Catfish and crayfish. 4 men, Hassler and Sparks, Laver and Mills. They did not know the others had been captured. They prepared for the final night. Bordeaux was 9 miles upriver. 1 more night of paddling. Then, the attack. At 2100 hours, December 11th, catfish and crayfish launched. The river was flat calm. Sky was clear. Visibility was excellent. This was both advantage and danger. They could navigate easily, but they could be seen easily. They paddled slowly, silently. Each paddle stroke was controlled. No splashing, no noise. They moved like ghosts on the water. At midnight, the docks of Bordeaux appeared. Lights illuminated the waterfront. Ships were moored along both banks. Hassler counted 7 large vessels. Freighters, blockade runners. The targets, he signaled to Laver. Catfish would attack the western docks. Crayfish would attack the eastern docks. They separated. Hassler and Sparks paddled toward the first target, a large freighter, Alabama, 5,000 tons, moored alongside a dock, sentries visible on deck. Catfish approached from downriver, using shadows from adjacent vessels. At 0030 hours, they reached Alabama's starboard side. Hassler pulled out a limpet mine. He armed it. 9-hour delay. The mine would detonate at 0930 hours. He leaned over and placed the mine below the waterline. The magnet held. He placed a second mine, then a third. 5 mines on Alabama. They moved to the next target, another freighter, Tannenfels, 7,000 tons, German blockade runner. 3 mines placed below the waterline. Then to another vessel, Portland, 3,000 tons, 2 mines. Catfish had expended 8 mines. Time was 0200 hours. Hassler signaled Sparks, withdraw. Meanwhile, Laver and Mills and Crayfish had reached the eastern docks. They found 2 vessels. Dresden, cargo freighter, 5 mines placed. Another vessel, name unknown. 3 mines. Crayfish had expended 8 mines. They withdrew at 0230 hours. Both kayaks rendezvoused downriver at 0300 hours. Mission accomplished. 16 limpet mines planted. 7 ships attacked. They had 6 hours before detonation. They needed to be far from Bordeaux when the mines exploded. They paddled downriver with the ebb tide. By 0500 hours, they had covered 10 miles. At Blaye, they beached the kayaks. Using knives, they slashed the canvas and sank the kayaks in the river. The cockleshells were destroyed. The escape began. At 0900 hours, December 12th, the mines detonated. The explosions were heard across Bordeaux. Alabama was holed badly. She began listing. Pumps could not control flooding. She was towed to shallow water and grounded. Repairs took 3 months. Tannenfels suffered severe damage. She listed heavily and eventually sank. She was raised but never returned to service. Portland suffered internal fires and hull damage. Repairs took 2 months. Dresden sank to the bottom of the harbor. She was later raised but scrapped. 2 other vessels received minor damage. The German response was immediate. Cordons were established. Patrols saturated the area. Gestapo began interrogations. The captured Marines, Conway, Fisher, Wallace, and Ewart, were executed that day. But the Germans did not know how many commandos were involved. They searched for weeks. Hundreds of troops combed the countryside. Checkpoints were established on every road. Hassler, Sparks, Laver, and Mills evaded separately. Hassler and Sparks traveled together. They walked by night, hid by day. French civilians provided food and shelter despite the risks. On December 18th, they reached the village of Ruffick. Mary Lindell, an agent of MI9, The British Escape and Evasion Organization provided false papers and arranged transport. By January 5, 1943, Hassler and Sparks reached Spain. By February, they were in Gibraltar. By March, they were home. Laver and Mills traveled separately. They were less fortunate. On December 18, they were betrayed. A French civilian reported them to German authorities. They were captured near Montlieu, under interrogation. They maintained cover stories. They claimed to be downed airmen. The Germans did not believe them. On March 23, 1943, under Hitler's Commando order, they were executed by firing squad at Barnbruch in Germany. Laver was 23. Mills was 22. Of 10 Marines who launched from HMS Tuna, 2 survived. 8 were killed. 6 executed. 2 drowned. The survival rate was 20%. This was within Hassler's estimates. He had predicted 70 to 80% casualties. The mission was designed as a one-way trip. The men knew this. They went anyway. The strategic value of Operation Frankton has been debated. The ships damaged were repaired and returned to service. The impact on German supply lines was minimal. Blockade running continued. The cargo still reached Germany. Some historians argue the raid accomplished little militarily. The 8 lives lost exceeded the value of temporary damage to 7 ships. But this analysis misses the point. Operation Frankton was not primarily about sinking ships. It was about demonstrating reach, about proving that no German installation was safe from attack, about showing British forces could strike anywhere, about maintaining an offensive spirit after years of defeats, about boosting morale at home and unsettling the enemy. By these measures, the raid succeeded completely. The British press celebrated the Cockleshell Heroes for months. The story provided exactly the narrative the public needed. Brave men, audacious mission, success against odds. Churchill personally commended Hassler. Mountbatten declared Operation Frankton the most courageous and imaginative raid of the war. The morale value was significant. The German reaction revealed the raid's impact. Hitler was reportedly furious that canvas boats had penetrated Bordeaux's defenses. Security at all ports was increased. Troops were diverted to guard installations against future raids. The Germans never again felt secure even in heavily defended positions. The psychological effect was substantial. Hassler received the Distinguished Service Order. Sparks received the Distinguished Service Medal. Laver and Wallace were posthumously mentioned in dispatches. The other Marines received no recognition because their participation remained classified. Their families were told only that they died on active service. The full story was not revealed until after the war. In 1955, the raid was dramatized in the film The Cockleshell Heroes. José Ferrer directed and starred as Hassler. The film was commercially successful in Britain. It reinforced the legend, but it also simplified and sanitized the story. The film portrayed the raid as heroic adventure. The reality was darker. 8 men died. Most were executed after capture. The survivors endured 3 months of evasion in constant fear of betrayal and death. Hassler never glorified the raid. He was reportedly uncomfortable with the attention. He continued developing unconventional warfare techniques. He worked on submersible canoes. He designed the Sleeping Beauty, a one-man submersible for underwater infiltration. After the war, he became a pioneering yachtsman. He developed self-steering gear for long-distance sailing. He competed in transatlantic races. He never spoke much about Frankton. He considered it one operation among many. Sparks also rarely discussed the raid. He returned to Royal Marine service. He survived the war. He lived quietly. In 2004, he attended ceremonies commemorating the 60th anniversary of D-Day. He was interviewed. He described Hassler as the finest officer he ever served under. He described the raid as terrifying. He said he never felt like a hero. He felt like a survivor. Sparks died in 2002 at age 80. Today, memorials commemorate Operation Frankton in multiple locations. In Portsmouth, a plaque at the Royal Marines Museum honors the Cockleshell Heroes. In Bordeaux, a memorial near the docks marks the raid. In Ruffec, a plaque honors Mary Lindell, who helped Hassler and Sparks escape. In Blanquefort, a tramway station is named Frankton. In multiple villages along the Gironde, plaques mark hiding spots and escape routes. The Frankton Trail, opened in 2002, traces the 100-mile escape route Hassler and Sparks followed through France. Hikers can walk the path, visiting sites where the Marines hid, where civilians helped them, where they narrowly avoided capture. The trail preserves the memory. One Cockle Mark II survives. Cachalot, damaged during the launch from HMS Tuna, is displayed at the Combined Military Services Museum in Malden, Essex, restored using original plans. It shows what the Marines paddled, 15 feet long, canvas sides, plywood bottom, impossibly small. Visitors stare at it and wonder how anyone paddled 70 miles in such a craft. But they did. The lessons of Operation Frankton remain relevant. Small forces can accomplish strategic objectives if properly trained and employed. Unconventional approaches succeed where conventional approaches fail. Technology matters less than determination. Sometimes canvas kayaks achieve what battleships cannot, and the greatest weapon is not firepower, but audacity, combined with meticulous planning. The raid also demonstrated the cost of such operations. 8 men died to damage 7 ships temporarily. The question is whether this was acceptable. Military historians debate this. Some argue the cost exceeded the value. Others argue the intangible benefits, morale and psychological impact, justified the casualties. There is no definitive answer. What is not debatable is the courage required. 10 men climbed into canvas kayaks and paddled into occupied France, knowing survival was unlikely. They did this because the mission mattered, because someone had to do it, because refusing was not acceptable to them. They were volunteers. They knew the risks. They went anyway. At 2100 hours on December 7, 1942, Major Hassler climbed into Catfish. Marine Sparks climbed in behind him. They paddled away from HMS Tuna into the Bay of Biscay. 5-meter swells, 3-degree water, 70 miles ahead, 5 nights of paddling, against tides, patrols, probability. They paddled because Britain needed them to. They succeeded because they were willing to die trying. Of the 10 who launched, 8 died. 2 survived. The ships were damaged. The mission succeeded. The Cockleshell Heroes entered legend. But the legend obscures the reality. This was not adventure. This was not heroism for its own sake. This was 10 men in canvas boats doing what had to be done, knowing most would not return. Catfish and crayfish reached Bordeaux on December 11th. 16 limpet mines were planted. 7 ships were hit. The mines detonated on schedule. Hassler and Sparks escaped. Laver and Mills were captured and executed. Conway, Fisher, Wallace, and Ewart were captured and executed. Sheard and Moffat drowned. 8 men dead. 2 men home. Mission accomplished. That was Operation Frankton. The Cockleshell Heroes. The kayak raid on Bordeaux. 70 miles up the Gironde. 5 nights of paddling. Canvas boats against Nazi Germany. 10 men who went because someone had to. 8 men who died because that was the price. 2 men who survived to tell the story, and the story needed telling. Not to glorify war, not to romanticize sacrifice, but to remember that sometimes the greatest operations are conducted by the smallest forces, that sometimes canvas kayaks accomplish what battleships cannot, that sometimes the most important weapon is not firepower, but the willingness to paddle into darkness knowing you probably will not return. That was the lesson of the Cockleshell Heroes, and it remains true today.